When Marcus Henderson called me into his corner office that Tuesday afternoon in March, I already knew what was coming. The signs had been building for months. The way he'd started excluding me from leadership meetings, the subtle shift in his tone during our one-on-ones, the careful way he'd begun redistributing my key accounts to other team members under the guise of workload management. I sat across from his mahogany desk, watching him fidget with his Mont Blanc pen while he built up to what he clearly thought would be devastating news. Behind him, the Seattle skyline stretched gray and imposing through floor-to-ceiling windows, much like the conversation I was about to endure. He cleared his throat twice before beginning his prepared speech about the firm's evolving needs and strategic direction, how they were looking for partners who could demonstrate not just revenue generation, but leadership qualities that aligned with the company's long-term vision, how difficult these decisions were, but ultimately necessary for the greater good of the organization. What struck me most was how genuinely he seemed to believe his own reasoning. Here was a man who had watched me bring in 40% of our regional office's revenue for the past 3 years, and he was explaining to me why that wasn't enough. Not enough for partnership consideration. Not enough, apparently, for basic respect. The irony wasn't lost on me. 6 months earlier, I'd been the one they sent to salvage the Morrison Industries account when their previous relationship manager had botched the renewal negotiations. 3 weeks of 18-hour days, countless technical deep dives, and more client dinners than I care to remember, but I'd pulled it off. A 5-year extension worth $8.7 million in annual fees. Marcus had taken me out for drinks afterward, talking about how that was exactly the kind of performance that separated the partners from the senior associates. Apparently, his memory was more selective than mine. As he continued his monologue about team dynamics and cultural fit, I found myself thinking about the conversation I'd had with Sarah Chen 2 weeks prior. Sarah had been with the firm for 12 years, made partner 5 years ago, and had always been direct with me about the realities of advancement. Over coffee, she'd warned me about the whispers in the leadership meetings. How certain people felt I was too aggressive in client acquisition, too focused on results rather than process, too willing to challenge internal decisions when they didn't serve our clients' best interests. In other words, too effective for my own good. The fascinating thing about corporate politics is how success can become a liability if it makes the wrong people uncomfortable. When you consistently outperform your peers, you force uncomfortable questions about why others aren't achieving similar results. When you solve problems others can't, you highlight their limitations. When you build strong client relationships based on competence rather than glad-handing, you implicitly criticize a system built on the latter. Marcus was still talking, but my attention had shifted to the stack of client files on his credenza. I could see the Morrison folder, thick with documentation from our recent contract negotiations. Next to it, the Hartwell Group file, another account I'd landed after their previous firm had failed to understand their technical requirements. Behind those, at least 6 other clients who had specifically requested to work with me after hearing about my results through industry connections. These weren't clients who had been handed to me as part of some inherited book of business. Each one represented months of relationship building, technical expertise, and strategic thinking. Each one had chosen our firm specifically because of capabilities I brought to the table, and each one, I realized, would probably be reassigned to other team members within the week. The truly remarkable thing was how Marcus seemed to genuinely believe he was being generous. He spent considerable time outlining the transition plan for my responsibilities, emphasizing how carefully they'd selected the team members who would be taking over my accounts, how they wanted to ensure continuity for our clients during this change, how important it was that I provide comprehensive handover documentation to ensure nothing fell through the cracks. He actually used the phrase seamless transition, as if 27 months of relationship building and technical knowledge could be distilled into a few PowerPoint presentations and bullet-pointed summaries. I let him finish his entire presentation without interruption, partly because I was curious to see how far he would go with his justifications, but mostly because I was running calculations in my head. Revenue numbers, client contract terms, competitive positioning, market opportunities. The kind of strategic analysis that had become second nature after 8 years in management consulting. When he finally concluded with expressions of appreciation for my contributions and hopes that I would consider staying on as a senior associate, I simply nodded and asked about the timeline for the transition. His relief was palpable. He'd clearly expected pushback, maybe even an emotional outburst. Instead, he got professional acknowledgement and practical questions about logistics. We spent another 20 minutes discussing the handover process, which clients would be reassigned to whom, what documentation would be required, how much time I'd have to prepare transition materials. Marcus seemed genuinely pleased with how smoothly the conversation was going. He even mentioned how this kind of mature response to difficult news was exactly what separated true professionals from those who couldn't handle adversity. I almost smiled at that one. The following morning, I arrived at the office an hour early and began a comprehensive audit of my client portfolio. Not the sanitized version that would go into official transition documents, but a realistic assessment of relationship dependencies, technical requirements, and competitive vulnerabilities. The kind of analysis that only comes from direct client interaction and deep understanding of their business challenges. The Morrison Industries account was particularly interesting. Their technical requirements were complex enough that it had taken me 3 months to fully understand their infrastructure needs when I first took over the relationship. The previous account manager had been treating them like a standard enterprise client, which was why they'd been considering switching firms when I inherited the account. It wasn't until I spent 2 weeks on site with their engineering team that I understood the unique aspects of their operational model. More importantly, I knew that Morrison's CFO, Janet Walsh, had been explicit about her preference for working with consultants who understood the technical aspects of their business rather than just the financial implications. She'd mentioned during our last quarterly review that she'd had poor experiences with account transitions at previous firms, where relationship managers treated technical expertise as a commodity that could be easily transferred between team members. Hartwell Group presented similar challenges. Their CEO, Robert Hartwell, had specifically chosen our firm because of my background in operations optimization. His previous consulting relationship had ended badly when their account manager couldn't understand the interdependencies in their supply chain model. Robert had made it clear that he valued technical competence over personal chemistry, which was why he'd been willing to switch firms to work with me. These weren't accounts that could be successfully managed by generic relationship building and surface-level industry knowledge. They required deep technical understanding, operational expertise, and the kind of strategic thinking that comes from years of hands-on experience with complex business challenges. Over the next 2 weeks, while publicly focusing on transition documentation, I quietly began reaching out to my network. Not aggressively, and certainly not in any way that could be construed as client solicitation while still employed by the firm. But I had legitimate reasons to touch base with former colleagues, industry contacts, and previous clients about market conditions and professional opportunities. The responses were revealing. 3 separate contacts mentioned unsolicited inquiries they'd received about my availability. 2 former clients expressed frustration about their current consulting relationships and asked whether I might be open to discussing new opportunities. A former colleague who'd left to start his own practice mentioned that he'd been thinking about our previous conversations regarding the limitations of traditional consulting models. Most interesting was a call from David Kim, a former client who'd moved to a larger company since our last engagement. He'd been having discussions with his new board about bringing in strategic consulting support, and my name had come up in those conversations. Would I be interested in an informal discussion about potential opportunities? These conversations reminded me of something I'd learned early in my consulting career. Strong professional relationships are built on demonstrated competence and shared results, not corporate affiliations. When clients value your work, they value you as an individual consultant, not as a representative of whatever firm happens to employ you at the moment. By the end of March, I had a clear picture of both the challenge and the opportunity ahead of me. The challenge was obvious, starting over professionally at a point in my career when I should have been moving into partnership. The opportunity was less obvious, but potentially more significant, building something that actually reflected my professional values and capabilities rather than fitting into someone else's constraints. The decision point came during my final week at the firm. Marcus had scheduled what he called an exit interview, though it felt more like a victory lap for him. He wanted to discuss lessons learned and get my thoughts on how future transitions might be handled more effectively. The kind of feedback session that sounds collaborative but really serves to validate decisions that have already been made. During that conversation, he made several comments that crystallized my thinking about the situation. He talked about how the firm was evolving toward a more collaborative model, where individual performance was less important than team dynamics, how they were looking for partners who could elevate others rather than just excelling individually, how my results, while impressive, hadn't been achieved in a way that built sustainable capabilities across the broader team. The subtext was clear. My success was somehow selfish because it hadn't made everyone else equally successful. This was the moment I realized that staying in the traditional consulting model, even at a different firm, would eventually lead to similar constraints. The problem wasn't Marcus or even our particular firm culture. The problem was a system that treated individual expertise as a threat to collaborative mediocrity. That evening, I called David Kim and told him I was interested in discussing his consulting needs in more detail. Not as a potential employee, but as an independent consultant who might be able to provide the kind of strategic support his company was seeking. The conversation lasted 2 hours and covered everything from operational challenges to market positioning to organizational development. By the end, we had outlined a potential 6-month engagement that would address several critical business issues his team was facing. More importantly, we had identified the specific outcomes they needed and how my background aligned with their requirements. 3 weeks later, I had signed contracts for 2 consulting engagements and was in active discussions about 3 others. Not because I had aggressively marketed myself, but because I had focused on understanding client needs and demonstrating how my capabilities could address their specific challenges. The most satisfying aspect wasn't the financial success, though that was certainly meaningful. It was the realization that clients were willing to pay premium rates for consulting services when they could see direct connections between consultant expertise and business results, something that had been obscured in the traditional firm model where client relationships were mediated through multiple layers of management structure. By June, I had established Chen Strategic Consulting with Sarah Chen, who had decided to leave the firm after watching my transition experience. Sarah brought complementary skills in organizational development and change management, plus her own network of client relationships that valued technical competence over political positioning. Our first major success came when Morrison Industries reached out about expanding their strategic planning process. Janet Walsh had been frustrated with the service quality after my departure from the previous firm and had convinced her board to explore alternative consulting options. The engagement grew from a 3-month planning project to a comprehensive operational review that lasted 8 months and generated more revenue than I had brought in during my best year at the previous firm. Similar patterns emerged with other clients. Organizations that valued results over process were willing to pay substantial premiums for consultants who could demonstrate direct connections between their work and business outcomes. Companies that had been underserved by traditional consulting models were eager to work with specialists who understood their specific challenges. What surprised me was how quickly word spread through professional networks about our different approach to consulting. We weren't trying to build a large firm with multiple service lines and complex management structures. We were focused on delivering exceptional results for a smaller number of clients who valued expertise over elaborate project management processes. Within 9 months, we had grown to a team of 6 consultants, each with deep expertise in specific areas and proven track records of client success. Not because we had actively recruited from our previous firm, but because talented consultants were attracted to a model that rewarded performance over politics. The real validation came in December, when I received a call from Robert Hartwell about a strategic challenge his company was facing. His current consulting firm had been struggling with the technical aspects of the engagement, and he needed someone who could quickly understand the operational implications of the strategic decisions they were considering. During our initial meeting, he mentioned that he'd heard about our firm through several industry contacts who had been impressed with our results-focused approach. He'd specifically asked around about consultants who had both strategic thinking capabilities and hands-on operational experience, and my name had come up consistently in those conversations. The engagement went exceptionally well, and Robert introduced us to 3 other CEOs who were looking for similar consulting support. Each of these introductions led to substantial engagements that demonstrated the kind of strategic impact that clients were willing to pay premium rates to achieve. By the end of our first full year, Chen Strategic Consulting had generated more revenue than the regional office I had left was producing with 15 consultants. Not because we were charging excessive rates, but because we were delivering results that clients valued highly enough to expand engagements and provide referrals to their professional networks. The most interesting development was how our success affected the competitive landscape. Several traditional consulting firms began reaching out to discuss potential partnerships or acquisition opportunities. They had noticed our growth and were curious about our approach to client development and service delivery. These conversations were illuminating because they revealed how much the traditional consulting model constrained both consultant performance and client outcomes. Partners at established firms were dealing with overhead structures and internal politics that prevented them from focusing on the strategic work that clients actually valued. They were spending more time managing internal processes than solving client problems. In contrast, our model allowed us to focus almost exclusively on client needs and outcome generation. We didn't have to navigate complex approval processes for creative solutions or justify our approaches to multiple layers of management. We could respond quickly to client needs and adapt our methods based on what actually worked rather than what fit established procedures. The turning point for external recognition came when we were invited to present at the Regional Consulting Excellence Conference about innovative service delivery models. The presentation focused on how outcome-based consulting could generate superior results for both clients and consultants compared to traditional billable hour models. The response was overwhelmingly positive, with several attendees commenting afterward that our approach addressed many of the limitations they had experienced with conventional consulting relationships. Multiple potential clients approached us after the presentation about consulting opportunities, and we received several inquiries from consultants who were interested in joining our team. More significantly, the presentation was covered in 2 industry publications, which led to additional visibility and client inquiries from companies that were frustrated with their current consulting relationships. The articles emphasized our focus on measurable outcomes and technical expertise, which resonated with executives who had been disappointed by consultants who prioritized process over results. The real satisfaction came from seeing how our approach enabled each team member to maximize their professional capabilities. Without the constraints of traditional firm hierarchies and billable hour requirements, our consultants could focus on the strategic work that generated the most value for clients. They could build deeper expertise in their specialty areas and develop stronger client relationships based on demonstrated competence. Sarah often commented that she was doing the best work of her career because she could focus on solving complex organizational challenges rather than managing internal firm politics. Our other team members expressed similar sentiments about being able to concentrate on client success rather than navigating bureaucratic processes. The financial results were equally gratifying. Within 18 months, each of our senior consultants was earning significantly more than they had at traditional firms, while working fewer hours and having more control over their professional development. Clients were paying premium rates because they could see direct connections between our work and their business results. This created a virtuous cycle where strong financial performance allowed us to be selective about client relationships, which enabled us to focus on engagements where we could generate exceptional outcomes, which led to referrals and reputation building that attracted even better opportunities. The most amusing development was periodic contact from my former firm about potential collaboration opportunities. Apparently, they had lost several key clients after my departure and were struggling to rebuild their capabilities in the technical areas where I had previously led their service delivery. Marcus reached out twice about potential subcontracting arrangements where they could leverage our expertise for client engagements that required technical capabilities they no longer had in-house. The conversations were cordial but ultimately unproductive, since our business model was built around direct client relationships rather than supporting other firms' service delivery. More interesting were the individual approaches from former colleagues who were curious about our growth and success. Several had heard about our client results through industry networks and were exploring whether there might be opportunities to join our team or develop similar independent practices. These conversations revealed how many talented consultants were frustrated by the limitations of traditional firm structures, but hadn't considered alternatives until they saw evidence that different models could actually work. They had assumed that independent consulting meant sacrificing income stability and professional development opportunities, but our experience suggested the opposite might be true. The validation became complete when we were approached by a private equity firm about investment opportunities for scaling our service delivery model. They had been tracking innovative consulting businesses and were impressed by our growth trajectory and client retention rates. While we ultimately decided not to pursue external investment, the conversations confirmed that our approach represented a genuine market opportunity rather than just a successful individual transition. There was institutional recognition that outcome-based consulting could generate superior returns compared to traditional models. The most meaningful recognition came from clients themselves. Janet Walsh at Morrison Industries mentioned during a quarterly review that our strategic consulting had contributed to their best operational performance in 5 years. Robert Hartwell credited our work with helping his company successfully navigate a complex acquisition that had strengthened their market position significantly. These weren't generic testimonials about service quality or relationship management. They were specific acknowledgments that our consulting work had generated measurable business results that contributed to their company's success. Looking back 2 years later, the decision to leave traditional consulting was clearly the right choice for both professional and personal reasons. Not because it provided some kind of dramatic revenge against people who had undervalued my contributions, but because it created opportunities to do better work with better results for everyone involved. The irony is that Marcus was partially right about my not being partner material, just not in the way he intended. I wasn't suited for partnership in a firm that prioritized internal politics over client results and process compliance over problem-solving innovation. But those limitations reflected more on the firm's model than on my professional capabilities. Building Chen Strategic Consulting demonstrated that there were clients who valued technical expertise and outcome generation enough to pay premium rates for consulting services. There were talented consultants who preferred to focus on strategic work rather than administrative processes, and there were business models that could generate superior results for everyone involved when properly structured and executed. The success wasn't about proving anyone wrong or achieving some kind of personal vindication. It was about discovering professional opportunities that better aligned with both my capabilities and my values. About building something that reflected what consulting could be when freed from constraints that didn't serve either consultants or clients effectively. The most satisfying aspect has been watching our team members develop expertise and build client relationships that demonstrate the value of deep technical knowledge combined with strategic thinking. Each of them is doing the best work of their careers because they can focus on what they do exceptionally well, rather than conforming to generic service delivery models. Our clients consistently comment on the difference between our approach and their previous consulting experiences. They appreciate working with consultants who understand their business challenges deeply enough to provide innovative solutions rather than applying standardized methodologies that may or may not address their specific needs. This suggests that the traditional consulting model may have systemic limitations that prevent both consultants and clients from achieving their full potential. When consulting relationships are mediated through complex firm structures and constrained by standardized processes, both sides may be settling for suboptimal outcomes. In retrospect, Marcus did me a significant favor by forcing me to consider alternatives to traditional career advancement. His decision to pass me over for partnership pushed me toward opportunities that were ultimately much more rewarding than anything I could have achieved within the constraints of the previous firm's structure. The experience also highlighted how professional success depends as much on organizational fit as individual capabilities. Being highly competent in an environment that doesn't value competence can be more limiting than being moderately skilled in an organization that recognizes and rewards excellence. Most importantly, it demonstrated that there are usually more professional options available than we initially realize. When faced with disappointing career developments, the natural tendency is to look for similar positions at different organizations. But sometimes the better solution is to question whether the entire model needs to be reconsidered. The success of Chen Strategic Consulting suggests that many talented professionals may be operating under unnecessary constraints that prevent them from maximizing their capabilities and earning potential. Traditional firm structures that prioritize internal harmony over individual excellence may be limiting both professional development and client outcomes. For consultants considering similar transitions, the key insight is that professional relationships and expertise are portable assets that can be leveraged in multiple contexts. Clients who value your work will continue to value it regardless of your institutional affiliation, and talented colleagues will be attracted to opportunities that allow them to focus on work they find meaningful. The most important factor is having confidence that your professional capabilities can generate value independently of whatever organizational structure currently employs them. Once that confidence is established, a wide range of alternative career paths becomes possible. The financial success has been gratifying, but the professional satisfaction has been more significant. Each day involves work that directly contributes to client success, collaboration with colleagues who are focused on similar goals, and the opportunity to develop expertise in areas that genuinely interest me. These are the kinds of professional rewards that should be available to anyone who consistently generates strong results and maintains high standards for their work. The fact that they're often difficult to achieve within traditional organizational structures suggests that those structures may need to evolve to remain competitive in attracting and retaining top talent. When I think about Marcus now, it's with appreciation rather than resentment. His decision to exclude me from partnership consideration forced me to discover professional opportunities I never would have explored otherwise. In trying to diminish my career prospects, he inadvertently created the catalyst for much greater success than I could have achieved by staying with the firm. The lesson isn't about the satisfaction of proving anyone wrong, but about the importance of recognizing when your professional environment isn't aligned with your capabilities and values. Sometimes the best response to career disappointments is to question whether you're pursuing opportunities in the right context rather than simply looking for similar opportunities elsewhere. The success of our consulting practice has exceeded my initial expectations in terms of both financial performance and professional satisfaction. More importantly, it has demonstrated that alternative career paths can provide opportunities for growth and achievement that may not be available within traditional organizational structures. This experience has reinforced my belief that professional success ultimately depends on finding environments where your capabilities are valued and where you can focus on work that generates meaningful results. When those conditions are met, both individual and organizational success tend to follow naturally. The most rewarding aspect has been building something that reflects my professional values and provides opportunities for exceptional work by everyone on our team. That sense of alignment between capabilities, values, and daily work activities has been worth far more than any traditional career advancement could have provided. Looking forward, the goal is to continue growing Chen Strategic Consulting in ways that maintain our focus on client results and consultant excellence. The market seems to have substantial demand for outcome-based consulting services, and we're well positioned to continue expanding our capabilities and client relationships. The experience of building an independent consulting practice has been professionally transformative in ways I couldn't have anticipated when Marcus first delivered his news about partnership prospects. What initially seemed like a career setback became the foundation for much greater professional achievement and personal satisfaction. Sometimes the best thing that can happen to your career is being forced to discover opportunities you never would have considered otherwise. The key is maintaining confidence in your professional capabilities and remaining open to alternative paths that might better align with your goals and values. The success of our practice continues to generate opportunities for growth and development that exceed anything I could have achieved within the constraints of traditional firm structures. Each new client relationship and successful engagement creates additional possibilities for both individual and organizational advancement. Most importantly, the work itself remains engaging and meaningful because it focuses on generating real results for clients who value expertise and strategic thinking. That sense of professional purpose and achievement has been the most significant outcome of what initially appeared to be a disappointing career development. When I occasionally encounter former colleagues from the previous firm, the conversations are always cordial and often quite positive. Several have mentioned that they admire what we've built and are curious about how we've achieved such strong growth in a relatively short period. These interactions reinforce my conviction that the decision to leave traditional consulting was the right choice for everyone involved. The previous firm is better served by partners who are genuinely aligned with their culture and approach, while I'm able to focus on work that maximizes my professional capabilities and generates superior results for clients. The ultimate validation isn't proving anyone wrong, but demonstrating that professional success can be achieved through multiple paths when you're willing to pursue opportunities that align with your capabilities and values. Sometimes the greatest career advancement comes from questioning traditional assumptions about how professional success should be pursued and achieved.